So take a look at this article from Financial Times. Donald Trump's return sends shivers through the anti-misinformation world. Does it? In some ways, I think this is great. I do think that there are a lot of people who are very worried in the anti-misinformation world. We saw the misinformation industrial complex rise ever since Donald Trump became president, and it absolutely needs to go away. It's got to go away. We cannot have organizations that are funded by the government in particular and in cahoots with the government, working with the government, to go around flagging what they deem to be misinformation or disinformation or worse, malinformation, go around flagging it and then censoring Americans. That is antithetical to what we believe this country is supposed to be all about. So yes, this should go away, and all of the misinformation industrial complex should be quaking in their boots. But there are some others who are not quaking in their boots. In fact, they're welcoming Trump's administration, hoping that the Trump administration will ramp up censorship against certain things, the things that they support. And we're going to get into that. Let's read this article a little bit. The incoming Trump administration's vow to dismantle the left-wing censorship cartel has thrown a shadow over the cottage industry of academics, nonprofits, and researchers that sprang up to combat a tide of digital misinformation and threatens to disrupt the big tech companies behind the world's most popular platforms. Researchers fear Donald Trump will make good on his past promises to crack down further on the misinformation field in the U.S. for alleged election interference. Among those threats, he said he would seek to curb funds to any universities found to have engaged in censorship activities, such as flagging social media content for removal or blacklisting for at least 5 years. So here's the thing about this that alarms me. Do you remember Bill Ackman? Right. So Bill Ackman was the loudmouth voice that was on social media screaming about DEI in colleges. And the reality was his screams had nothing at all to do with DEI. But he was on a crusade. He was on an absolute crusade to go after all of these all of the presidents of these universities and get them. And he says, DEI has ruined our universities. Look at what happened. We've got to go over and we got to curb DEI. And people on the right, the pro-free speech crowd, those who believe themselves to be pro-free speech, championed Bill Ackman and said, yeah, get him, DEI is toxic. And I agree, DEI has been largely very toxic. I think it started off with good intentions, but the road to hell is paved in good intentions. Started off with good intentions, trying to equal the playing field for everybody rather than, there's a natural, it's very, very much human nature to have like a good old boy club. And this happens in every single group. I don't just mean the good old boys, but I also mean this could be with women. This could be with people of color. This could be with religions. This could be, any group. Whenever you've got an in-group, people tend to want to surround themselves with people they feel familiar with, they have commonality with, they enjoy. And so, if you're a boss and you're looking to hire somebody, you're often going to hire somebody who has the same likes and enjoyment, somebody that you see yourself spending 8 hours a day with. If you have an application, you're the president of a university and you have students that you're admitting in, it's natural human nature to gravitate towards people you identify with one way or another, whatever that identification is. It just so happens in this country for a very long time, it has been white male. That is the reality of it. So white men would tend to favor other white men. That's not because white men are particularly sinister or they wanted to remain, they had this conscious desire to keep white men in power. That's not the way it works. It's just natural human nature to embrace your in-group and to want to facilitate more relationships with people that you identify with. I mean, that's just like a normal way of being. So the whole concept of like affirmative action and DEI was to to put in place mechanisms that would counter our very natural human nature to just promote our own kind, whatever that own kind is. That was the idea. Good intention. You're trying to unravel it or trying to just kind of overcome a person's natural instinct. But then it went too far, obviously. It started going crazy. And instead of it, and not only that, but then when a person who was not in the in group made it into the university or got the job, then people would point at that person and say, you only got this because of affirmative action. You only got this because of the color of your skin or your gender or your religion or your race, whatever it is, right? Rather than on the merits. When really, so it was like a good intention, but it ultimately kind of unravels and, it backfires on a lot of people in a lot of ways. So DEI was one of those things. And then obviously DEI ended up just going really bonkers. I mean, they just went really nuts with it. So it makes sense that really because DEI got to a point where it became, rather than just embracing people of all kinds, it became a censorship regime in its own. You weren't allowed to voice anything against the DEI narrative, and you would be banned, censored. You wouldn't be allowed to speak at the universities. It's just been absolutely nutty. So yes, it should have been unraveled. But when Bill Ackman was going after the DEI of the university presidents and carding all of those presidents in front of Congress, advocating for them to be carded in front of Congress, he wasn't really doing it for DEI. The guy was doing it because he was wanting to protect Israel. That became very clear later on when Bill Ackman sort of dropped his DEI facade after the university presidents were fired for anti-Semitism very specifically. It wasn't about DEI. It was about anti-Semitism. So my concern is when we see that the incoming Trump administration is going to be going after colleges and universities found to have engaged in censorship activities, such as flagging social media content for removal or blacklisting, I agree that should be cracked down on. But I fear that the cracking down of something legitimate, like cracking down on DEI, is actually just a guise for, it's a ruse for actually cracking down on speech, and in particular speech that they deem to be hate speech, anti-Semitic hate speech, that they want to curb and crack down on and completely censor Americans from protesting a genocide that's happening in Israel. They will use this, well, we got to crack down on these universities because of all of their censorship practices. They will use this in order to actually censor, not crack down on censorship, but to censor. So it goes on to say in this article, he has signaled the seriousness of his intentions by choosing Brendan Carr as the new chair of the Federal Communications Commission, so the chair of the FCC. The Republican commissioner has echoed the forthcoming president's rhetoric on free speech and dismantling censorship. So that's true. Brendan Carr is coming into the administration, somebody who has said we got to crack down on the crackdown. All of this free speech crackdown that's going on, we got to crack down on the crackdown. But here's the kicker. Brendan Carr has also expressed quite a few sentiments. He's retweeted people like Bari Weiss, for example, and he's been very critical of the campus protests, the rise of anti-Semitism, quote unquote anti-Semitism. In fact, let me just read this. He retweeted, this is from Bari Weiss. When anti-Semitism moves from the shameful fringe into the public square, it's not about Jews. It's never about Jews. It's about everyone else. It's about the surrounding society or the culture or the country. It's an early warning system, a sign that society itself is breaking down. Or maybe not Bari Weiss. Maybe it just means that, the United States government has allowed itself to be completely bought off by big money Israel lobby interests, and people are pointing that out. And maybe, Bari, it's not about society crumbling and just pointing the finger at Jews because everything sucks, so it must be the Jews' fault. Maybe it's not that, but maybe there's an active genocide going on and Americans are fed up with funding it. Maybe it's that. But of course, Bari Weiss doesn't see it that way. And clearly neither does Brendan Carr because he retweeted it. So that's the incoming FCC commissioner, somebody who's supposed to be pro-free speech, but instead he's siding with people like Bari Weiss. He's made other comments about anti-Semitism, the rise of hate speech. Whenever anybody uses the term hate speech, that's a red flag right there. What is hate speech? There's no such thing as hate speech. It's bullshit, all of it. It's just a tool to censor. They label anything and everything hate speech in order to censor. So hate speech is an umbrella term that is used to basically facilitate and advocate for censorship. So be leery of anybody and everybody who uses the term hate speech. We're allowed to hate. You're allowed to hate spinach, broccoli. You're allowed to hate religion if you wanted to. You're allowed to hate the government. You're allowed to hate a culture, maybe even a country. You're allowed to hate anything you want. That is what makes America a free country. And the minute somebody says you're not allowed to hate, that you have to censor that speech. And then they tell you these are the categories. And then depending on who you're talking to, the categories shift. That is a censorship regime. And that is exactly what is being facilitated here. Goes on to say, I think it would, this is, now they're talking to, in the Financial Times, they're talking to people inside of the misinformation industry complex, and they're freaking out. And so here are some quotes of them freaking out. Here's one. I think it will be just a tsunami of critiques and witch hunts, said Megan Squire, the deputy director for data analytics at the Southern Poverty Law Center. I suspect some people in academia, where you get to choose your research, will self-censor or soften their research or shift their application area. We are all just waiting with bated breath, she added. Yeah, they should be afraid, because really there should be a crackdown on the fact that they have created a misinformation industry complex, and they are using it, they're making money, and they're going after and censoring. But they're not the only ones, right? It's not just coming from the left. There's also this whole rise of hate speech and that now the right is using, but the right is doing it for anti-Semitism very specifically. The left used hate speech for, LGBTQI plus type stuff. Here's another one. I'm pretty fucking scared, said one professor in the field, speaking on condition of anonymity due to fears of retribution. If this stuff happens, I will be on a plane out of America. Okay, good. Go. Get out of here. I mean, if you're pro-censorship, fine. Then go to a country that loves it. Another professor said the rhetoric had placed pressure on individuals, but also universities and colleges at an institutional level, and that discussions were being held internally about how to prepare. Quote, it's an existential threat to my livelihood and our research funding. It should be. We should shut down the misinformation complex. The misinformation complex should be shut down. Guess what else should be shut down? The military-industrial complex. That should go too. Pharmaceutical industrial complex. That could go as well. All of these should be shut down. It should be an existential threat to your livelihood and your research funding. The best thing that happened was when the Ministry of Misinformation got shut down in the U.S. government. Social media platforms could also be targeted, as Trump has suggested he would seek revisions to Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which grants social media companies immunity from being sued for content that appears on their platforms. Doing so, he said, would get platforms out of the censorship business. Now, this is what I really disagree with. We absolutely cannot dismantle Section 230. Section 230 is what allows free speech. And what is really alarming is that both sides on the left and the right have been advocating to dismantle Section 230. And this is, again, where the alarm bells go off. This is when someone, again, says hate speech. And one side is the left that says hate speech. One side's the right that says hate speech. But really, they're all just pro-censorship. They're just pro-censoring different things. Them wanting, both sides, wanting to get rid of Section 230 is a signal they want censorship. Now, the reasons are different. The reason why Democrats want to get rid of Section 230 is because they want social media companies to actively censor. They believe that social media companies should act as publishers and that they should editorialize all of our posts, that they should go through and they decide on what they basically sponsor, sign off on, or agree with, and those are the only things that they should be publishing. Anything and everything else should be censored because it's misinformation. And now, without Section 230, social media companies would be held legally liable for anything and everything anybody posts. Now, social media company without Section 230 is going to have to censor, because they would be found legally liable for anything and everything that people post, and you can't control people. So the only thing you can do is control people. I mean, you'd have to control the content on the platform in order to not be sued under Section 230. The reason why the right wants to get rid of Section 230 is because Rand Paul, and this is where I really, one of the few times I do not agree with Rand Paul, he really wants to get rid of Section 230. Now, I do believe that he's a free speech person, but I think that his premise is misplaced. He wants to go after Section 230 because he says, look, Section 230 was meant to give you immunity from posts, and you're acting like a publisher. So you're not behaving like a social media platform that deserves this immunity that you argued for in the 90s. Section 230 came about because of child porn, actually. Social media platforms were worried, and they said, look, we have these social media platforms. They're great. They're for everybody, but we can't control what people post. And we don't want to be held criminally liable if somebody uses it for something like child porn. We'll do our best to remove it. We'll work as fast as we can. We want to remove it from the platform. But if it gets posted and it's up there for a little while before we can get to it, we don't want to be held criminally liable. And ultimately, Congress agreed and created Section 230. So what Rand Paul is saying, and many on the right, and what the Trump administration is saying is, look, you are no longer behaving like a social media platform. You're behaving like a publisher, so therefore you shouldn't have Section 230 protections. Now, that might sound fine. That might sound like a reasonable argument. But the result of that argument, if Republicans get their way and Section 230 is gone, the result is the same as what Democrats want. I mean, the result is the same. So you have two different arguments, but you end up in the same place. And the same place is censorship. Lots of it. Tons of it. Only it. That's it. No longer would platforms be immune from any sort of protection. And so they would all be held liable, and you could just kiss X goodbye. TikTok, bye. Instagram, bye. Everything would go to censorship. It would have to be censored. It would have to be curated by the platform. So don't let this argument fool you from Republicans. Even though it might sound like, look, so you shouldn't have Section 230 because you're not even abiding by it. You're not behaving like a social, so you shouldn't have it. Sounds reasonable, but again, the outcome is exactly the same. And so we should be really, really leery of it. And when Republicans use that argument, and I don't think Rand Paul, like I said, I don't think he's doing it under this. I don't think Rand Paul's trying to mislead us or anything, but I think there are plenty of Republicans who, and I think many of them probably are not trying to mislead us, but I think they have donors, backers, lobbyists who are whispering in their ear saying, yeah, you're right. We should get rid of Section 230 because they're acting like publishers, so they should be punished. And the way we punish them is by removing this protection. That lobbyist has another agenda. That's the Bill Ackmans of the world who are whispering in the ears of these politicians and saying, yeah, let's get rid of that Section 230. That way, once it's gone, I can control the narrative and I can decide, because I have all the power and I'm now running the social media companies, I get to decide what opinions are put out there and which ones need to be silenced and censored. I get to decide and curate the content. And that's what these lobbyists are wanting. But they're tricking us. And we always have to watch out for these tricks because they're so clever. I mean, these people spend on both sides of the aisle. Big Pharma spends, and I'm just waiting for the twist. I'm waiting for the big Pharma twist. It's going to happen at some point because it certainly did with the left. Remember, the left was really the anti-Big Pharma crusaders. They were the ones out there saying, we got to Medicare for all. Big Pharma's making all the money. They're greedy. We got to go after them. And the right was like, oh, business is business. Like, let it be. And the big pharma industry, they've got billions upon billions of dollars. They spend millions upon millions of dollars to these really brilliant strategists. And these strategists figure out, they know the inner workings of human psychology. They know how you think, what's going to push your buttons. And they have figured out, okay, so you're this, bleeding heart liberal, and you want to rid the world of big pharma greed, and you want, healthcare to be affordable. All right, how are we going to get you on the side of big pharma? Ultimately, the goal is to get you championing big pharma. How are we going to get from this part where you hate them to down the road where we envision you loving them and embracing them and actually advocating for big pharma? Well, through time, they figured it out. I mean, these $1 million analysts were able to figure out how to infiltrate the mind of that bleeding heart liberal and get them to where they are today, which is who's the big champion of big pharma today? The liberals, the bleeding heart liberals, the ones that were saying, we want free medicine for everybody. Big pharma's a bunch of crooked, money grubbers. And now they're all saying, how dare you? You're anti-science if you don't take your shot 10 times. They figure it out every time. They figure it out with the right. Now they're doing it with the right. They figured out how to get the right in on the censorship, the misinformation industrial complex, how to get them in on the game. So this misinformation industrial complex, they see that their livelihood, they're facing an existential crisis. So what do? They don't want to lose their jobs. Oh no, they're not going to lose their jobs. This isn't really about ideology. This is about making money and job security. So what are they going to do? They're just going to pivot. Okay, so fine. We won't censor this whole notion of election interference, Russiagate, COVID stuff. We're not going to censor that anymore. No, 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 no. What would you like us to censor? What would you like us to censor? We'll do anything. We just want to keep our jobs. Okay, so you want us to censor hate speech, anti-Semites. You want us to go after that, pro-Hamas, all these Hamas supporters. Okay, great. We'll just do that. That's what we'll do. We'll censor that. So they just learn how to flip it, and they get into our brains. And we always have to be aware of this. We always have to be aware of whatever it is we're championing, whatever it is we think we're fighting for. Somehow don't let that industrial complex with all of their millions of dollars and their analysts and their psychology war games that they play on us, somehow guard against how they easily can get in and manipulate. And they figure it out. I mean, there was a period of time when the right, for a very brief period of time, they were like not into the culture war stuff. It was the left that was super into culture war, and they wanted to censor and silence and all of this. And the right was saying, no, we don't want that. And then suddenly when it came to, then there was like this whole alarm against pedophilia. Everybody was a pedo, right? And they started going down this, but the pedos, we got to stop the pedos. And of course, everybody wants to stop racism. Everybody wants to stop pedos. I mean, nobody wants any of these things in our society. But when one side goes above and beyond and they just see it everywhere, that is how you know that the propagandists they are working their brains. They're infiltrating their minds. They're working their brains to get them to go along with something they otherwise were not going along with. And they figure it out. They figure it out every single time. So my concern when I read this Financial Times article is, this whole, the misinformation, the anti-misinformation world is, they're shaking, they're quaking in their boots. Donald Trump is coming after them. But then I hear Brendan Carr gets nominated for the FCC, or that we're going to go after the universities. We're going to get them. Then I know, no, this is a psyop. This is just another one to get us to go along with censorship. And they'll get you with the stuff that you find abhorrent. Whatever you despise, they'll go after that. And then you'll think they're on your team and you'll go along with it. And the next thing you know, you're pro-censorship. You're pro-unraveling U.S. American freedoms and values. And you didn't even realize you were doing it. And then, of course, the next time around, it'll be the other team that's doing it to you. And we just have to guard against this. I do think that there will be some crackdown on some misinformation, but I also think there's going to be further crackdowns on speech that are going to happen through the Trump administration. And I just think we need to go into it with our eyes and ears wide open.